Thanks for joining us in another fascinating journey through the world of science here on the Science Channel podcast.
Great to be here.
And if you're finding these deep dives into the scientific literature interesting, please do give us a like and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us bring you more of this content.
Absolutely. Support is always appreciated.
So today we're tackling a question that sounds simple, but really isn't.
Not at all. It's surprisingly complex.
We're asking, how does a fly die? And obviously we don't mean the fly swatter. We're talking natural causes, the end of life for Drosophila melanogaster.
The fruit fly. Yeah, a cornerstone of biological research.
Right. We see tons of studies about their lifespan, how long they live under different conditions. But the actual physiological breakdown, what really causes them to die.
That's much less understood. Surprisingly, it's a bit of a puzzle.
Exactly. These tiny things are incredibly complex and, well, their final moments involve this whole cascade of system failures. We're going to try and unpack that today.
We are. We're drawing on a scientific review that pulls together what we currently know about how a fly's biology gives out at the end.
And the idea is that understanding this in flies might give us broader clues about aging itself, right? Even in other animals.
Precisely. The fundamental processes can be quite conserved.
Okay, but let's start there. Why focus so much on how a fly dies? Isn't knowing how long it lives the main thing in aging research?
That's a really good question. It might seem that way, but knowing the cause of death is actually crucial. It helps us differentiate, you see.
Differentiate between what?
Between interventions that target one specific problem, like fixing one particular age-related disease, versus those that affect the whole aging process more broadly.
Ah, okay. So, if a treatment makes flies live longer, you need to know if it just stopped them dying from, say, gut failure, or if it actually slowed down aging overall.
Exactly. That distinction is vital if you want to think about translating findings, perhaps eventually towards humans. You need to know what you're actually targeting.
Right. So just tracking survival curves isn't enough detail.
It can be misleading, yeah. You might miss specific effects or misunderstand the mechanism if you don't know what the flies in your control group are actually dying from.
And I imagine it's technically challenging, pinpointing a cause of death in something so tiny.
Oh, absolutely. Their size is a major hurdle. You can't exactly do a full autopsy in the same way you would with a larger animal.
And they'd probably degrade quickly.
Very quickly. They desiccate, they dry out really fast after death, so any subtle physiological signs can be lost almost immediately.
Okay, a tough subject to study then. So this review we're using, how does it approach this? How does it organize the potential causes?
It groups them into three sort of broad functional categories, basically three fundamental ways things can go wrong.
Okay.
First is loss of energy. Problems with getting energy, moving it around, using it, or controlling it.
Energy. Got it.
Second is loss of functional units. This is more about cells dying, maybe from toxins either internal or external or other kinds of damage.
Cell death. Okay. And the third?
Loss of fluid homeostasis. Basically losing control of the internal balance of water and electrolytes.
Energy, functional units, fluid balance. Sounds pretty fundamental.
They really are. And the review stresses that these aren't isolated categories. They're all interconnected.
Right. One thing failing could easily lead to another failing.
Exactly. And often, the immediate cause of death is probably the failure of a specific organ, but it's driven by these underlying systemic breakdowns. This framework just helps organize our thinking.
Makes sense. So let's dig into that first one. Loss of energy. The review mentions substrate intake first. What systems are key for taking fuel in, and how do they fail?
Right, intake. Two main players here. The gut for nutrients, and the tracheal system for oxygen.
Let's start with the gut. What happens there as a fly gets older?
A lot, actually. The fly intestine shows significant decline. For instance, certain cells, copper cells in the midgut, they become less acidic.
Less acidic. Why does that matter?
Well, that acidity is important for proper digestion. So if it drops, the fly just can't break down its food as effectively.
Okay, step one, digestion gets worse. What else?
The innate immunity within the gut also weakens. This can lead to an imbalance in the gut bacteria. The good and bad bacteria get out of whack. It's called commensal dysbiosis.
We hear about gut bacteria balance in humans, too.
We do. And critically, the lining of the gut, the epithelium, starts to lose its integrity. It becomes leaky.
Ah, the leaky gut idea again.
Exactly. And this breakdown of the gut barrier seems to correlate pretty strongly with how long the fly survives. It often happens before death.
Wow. So the gut lining failing is a major sign.
It seems to be. And then there are the intestinal stem cells, the ISCs. They're supposed to repair the gut lining.
What happens to them?
They get dysregulated. Often they actually start overproliferating, growing uncontrollably, but then they can become depleted. It's an imbalance linked to specific signaling pathways, J and K and Notch.
So too much growth, then not enough. Not good either way.
Right. And this loss of balance in the stem cells itself contributes to a shorter lifespan. It seems like a moderate reduction in that proliferation might actually be beneficial.
Huh. It's a fine line then.
It really is. And here's something fascinating. There's a sex difference.
Oh, how so?
Female intestinal stem cells tend to proliferate more. This seems to be an adaptation, perhaps linked to mating, making their guts maybe more resilient to certain stresses than males.
But is there a downside?
Yes. That higher proliferation makes them more prone to dysplasia, abnormal cell growth, and even gut tumors.
Ah, trade-off. Resilience versus long-term stability.
Looks like it. And this might be why things like dietary restriction often have a bigger lifespan benefit in female flies. It could be related to controlling this gut dysplasia.
Interesting. So interventions might work differently based on sex because of these gut differences.
It seems plausible, yes. Even drugs like rapamycin seem to help female gut health and lifespan more significantly. It really points to gut breakdown being a major limiting factor, especially maybe in females.
And what about just absorbing the nutrients? Does that decline too?
Yes, nutrient absorption efficiency goes down in the aging gut. The cells just don't take up nutrients as well.
So even if digestion happens, getting the fuel in is harder.
Right. But interestingly, if you experimentally boost a protein involved in nutrient absorption, you can actually make female flies more resistant to starvation and even extend their lifespan.
Wow. So directly targeting absorption helps. The gut is clearly critical for energy intake.
Absolutely critical.
Okay, what was the other intake system? The tracheal system?
Yes, the trachea. That's the network of tubes bringing oxygen directly to the tissues, like our respiratory system, but structured differently.
How does aging affect that?
Well, surprisingly, it's less understood than the gut. We know it's essential, obviously, but how it fails with age isn't perfectly clear.
So what are the possibilities?
The tracheal cells themselves could age and become less efficient at delivering oxygen, or the tubes could get blocked, maybe by surrounding tissues, like tumors, if they develop.
Makes sense. Blocked airways means no oxygen, no energy.
Exactly. And there are also tiny openings called spiracles, which control air entry and water loss. They're controlled by muscles.
And muscles weaken with age.
They generally do. So potentially the spiracle muscles could deteriorate, affecting airflow. But honestly, whether this is a significant factor in normal aging mortality, well, we still need more research on that.
Okay, so the tracheal system is vital, but its role in aging-related death is still a bit of an open question.
A bit, yes. Compared to the gut, certainly.
All right, so that's intake. Now, distribution. Getting the fuel and oxygen around the body. What's involved there?
That's primarily the heart and the hemolymph.
Hemolymph being the fly's blood.
Essentially, yes. They're circulatory fluid.
So the fly heart, does it suffer from age-related problems like ours?
It does, yes. We see structural changes, disruptions in how it contracts and relaxes. Heart rate tends to decrease, pumping function gets impaired, and they can even develop arrhythmias.
Irregular heartbeats in flies.
Yep. And it seems linked to issues with calcium handling in the heart cells and changes in which genes are active. The heart tissue also tends to get stiffer with age.
Stiffer? How?
Protein accumulation, actually. It creates a sort of fibrosis-like condition, making the heart less flexible and efficient.
So less efficient pumping. That would definitely impact energy distribution.
For sure. Now, here's an interesting point. Exercise seems to help slow down some of this cardiac decline in flies.
Like in humans.
Right. But counterintuitively, it doesn't seem to consistently make them live longer overall.
Really? A healthier heart doesn't mean a longer life.
Not automatically, it seems. Maybe other things limit lifespan more strongly. However, some changes, like the heart chamber getting slightly smaller when relaxed, might actually be adaptive coping mechanisms.
And are there specific molecules involved?
Yes. There's a protein called vinculin. It seems important for heart muscle integrity. If you make the fly heart produce more vinculin, it improves contractility and actually extends lifespan significantly.
Wow, so boosting that one protein helps the heart and makes the fly live longer.
It does. It shows how critical heart function is.
What about diet? Does a bad diet hurt the fly heart?
Oh, yes. High-fat or high-sugar diets accelerate cardiac decline. Though the lifespan shortening might not just be due to the heart failure, it could be indirect effects too.
And good dietary patterns.
Time-restricted feeding, eating only during certain hours, seems protective. It helps against both diet-induced and age-related heart problems and can extend lifespan.
It keeps coming up, time-restricted feeding.
Yeah.
Okay, and the hemolymph, how does that factor in?
Well, the hemolymph carries the nutrients. If the proteins that transport specific nutrients change with age, that could affect delivery.
Any examples?
Yeah, there's a protein, epilipoprotein D. Boosting its levels in the hemolymph makes flies more resistant to starvation and extends lifespan. So efficient nutrient transport matters.
Okay, so heart pumps, hemolymph carries. Failures in either disrupt energy distribution. That brings us to utilization, actually using the energy.
Exactly. The metabolic pathways that generate energy at the cellular level are fundamental. Disruptions there can definitely impact survival.
Do we see metabolic changes in aging flies?
We do. Changes in overall metabolic rate, shifts in which nutrient pathways are used. Older flies might rely less on glycolysis, for example, and more on other pathways like serine metabolism.
Is that necessarily bad?
That's the tricky part. The review notes the direct link to mortality isn't always clear. Some of these shifts might actually be adaptive, the fly trying to cope with other aging issues.
So changing metabolism isn't automatically a sign of failure?
Not necessarily, no. We know we can extend lifespan by tweaking nutrient-sensing pathways experimentally, but whether natural failures in those same pathways are a common cause of death, well, that's still unknown.
Right. What about cancer in flies? Does that fit under utilization? I guess tumors consume energy.
They do. Cancer can impact survival either by damaging tissues locally or by sucking up vital resources. Flies are used as cancer models, definitely.
But do they get cancer naturally very often?
It's relatively rare compared to mammals, mainly because most fly cells stop dividing after development. The big exception is the gut.
Ah, the gut again, with those stem cells.
Exactly. That stem cell dysplasia we talked about can lead to tumor-like growths in the aging gut. And these aging stem cells even show metabolic changes similar to cancer cells, linked to mitochondrial calcium levels declining.
So a link between aging, metabolism, stem cells, and gut tumors.
Seems to be, yes. And flies with mutations in tumor suppressor genes, they do have shorter lifespans. But whether they die directly from the tumor growth or from the associated energy drain and dysfunction, that still needs more work.
Okay, so cancer is a factor, maybe particularly in the gut, but perhaps not the most common cause of death overall. Let's shift to regulation, the nervous system, and hormones controlling energy.
Right, crucial systems. The brain and the flight muscles are huge energy consumers and regulators.
And we see decline there.
Definitely. Climbing ability, flight ability, classic signs of aging in flies. It's likely a mix of muscle weakening and deterioration of the neurons controlling them.
Makes sense.
Though interestingly, older flies seem to handle low oxygen okay and can fly surprisingly fast, maybe because of that metabolic shift in their muscles towards glycolysis we mentioned.
But you said inducing that shift early was bad.
I did. It shortens lifespan if you force it early. So it might be a necessary adaptation late in life, but maybe also a sign that things are starting to fail. A bit of a double-edged sword.
Complex. What other neuronal declines happen?
Reduced feeding, disrupted circadian rhythms, their daily cycles get messed up and sleep becomes more fragmented.
Does poor sleep affect lifespan?
The relationship is really intricate and still being studied, but yeah, these disruptions signal a breakdown in regulation. Also, brain glucose levels drop with age.
And the brain needs glucose.
Desperately. Restoring glucose levels in older fly brains can actually extend survival.
Wow. Fueling the brain is key. What about hormones? The endocrine system.
Hugely important for energy storage and longevity. Take the fly's main sugar, trehalose. It's regulated by insulin-like peptides, DILPs, and another hormone, AKH.
Like insulin and glucagon, Dennis.
Sort of, yeah. But here's the weird part. Getting rid of the cells making DILPs or having mutations in AKH often makes flies live longer, even though it messes up their sugar regulation.
Longer life despite bad sugar control. That seems backward.
It really does. It highlights how complex these hormonal effects are. Then there's ecdysone, a major steroid hormone.
What does that do?
Involved in development, reproduction. And again, reducing ecdysone signaling, either synthesis or the receptor, leads to longer life.
Fewer hormonal signals seem better for longevity, strangely.
In some cases, yes. There's also evidence flies might have something like our stress hormone cortisol. Giving them cortisone makes them more prone to infection, but paradoxically, sometimes extends lifespan in certain studies. More research needed there.
Definitely complex. Any sex-specific hormones?
Yes, juvenile hormone or JH. In females, high levels after mating seem to shorten lifespan, possibly by overactivating the immune system. Reducing JH extends lifespan in both sexes.
Okay, so hormone balance, especially around reproduction and immunity, is another critical factor. That covers energy regulation. Let's move to the second big category. Loss of functional units due to toxins. First, internal toxins, waste products.
Right, that's the job of the excretory system, the Malpighian tubules. They're like the fly's kidneys.
Filtering the hemolymph.
Exactly. Filtering waste, regulating ions and water. But with age, their ability to secrete waste declines and the junctions between their cells can become less stable.
Does fixing that help them live longer?
We don't know for sure if enhancing function extends lifespan, but we definitely know that dysfunction shortens it. For instance, unhealthy diets can cause stones, mineral concretions to form in the tubules.
Why kidney stones?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And these blockages impair waste removal, leading to toxic buildup and shorter life. So excretory failure, especially under dietary stress, can certainly be a direct cause of death.
Okay. What about external toxins or threats? The immune system's job.
Yep, dealing with pathogens, wound healing. The main immune cells are hemocytes, circulating in the hemolymph.
How does the immune system age?
Well, in the wild, infection is a huge killer. In the lab, infections might come from the fly's own gut if the barrier fails, or just because the immune system weakens overall. Hemocyte function, like their ability to engulf pathogens, declines. And in females, their numbers can actually decrease.
Less effective defense then.
Less effective at clearing infections, yes. But here's another paradox. The aging immune system often becomes chronically hyperactive. Low-grade inflammation all the time.
And that bad.
Yes, that chronic inflammation itself can shorten lifespan. Although some increased immune factors might be adaptive, preparing for higher infection risk. It's tricky.
So not just weaker, but also inappropriately overactive sometimes.
Exactly. And interventions that calm down that excessive immune activity, especially while preserving the gut barrier, tend to extend lifespan, particularly in females. It's about balance, not just strength.
Balance seems to be the key word for aging.
Heh.
Okay, last big category, loss of fluid homeostasis, water balance.
Crucial for flies. They're tiny and very prone to drying out, desiccation. They can only survive a short time without water.
Why are they so vulnerable?
Their respiratory system is open to the air, and they have a large surface area relative to volume. Their cuticle, the outer layer, has hydrocarbons to reduce water loss, but it's still a constant battle.
And aging makes it worse.
Yes, they become more susceptible to water imbalance, partly because their total extracellular fluid volume seems to decrease. High sugar diets, as we mentioned, can really worsen dehydration.
But giving them extra water helps.
It can rescue the lifespan shortening from those diets, yes. It shows how critical simple dehydration can be, especially if the diet creates osmotic stress.
So diet impacts hydration too.
Significantly. And even on a good diet, the aging excretory system, those Malpighian tubules, they also struggle to regulate water and salts properly.
So the kidneys failing affects water balance too.
Absolutely. Plus, the cuticle might become more permeable with age, or they might lose the behavioral drive to drink. Lots of potential failure points leading to fatal desiccation. And it's not just water balancing acids, bases, redox state failures there can cause systemic collapse too.
So many ways for things to go wrong. It really paints a picture of aging as this multifaceted decline across interconnected systems.
That's exactly it. And the review really emphasizes that understanding all these potential failure points in flies is vital for aging research overall. It helps us interpret lifespan studies better and identify targets.
We need to remember context matters, right? Genetics, sex, the lab environment.
Absolutely. Which systems fail first might depend heavily on those factors. What limits lifespan in one condition might be different in another.
Are we getting better at studying this?
New tools.
Definitely. Things like continuous behavioral monitoring, high-res imaging like micro-CT scans, they let us see age-related changes in much greater detail now.
So what's the future direction? Well, the review suggests developing something like a frailty index for flies, similar to what's used in human aging research. A way to score overall functional decline.
To distinguish between just preventing one specific death cause versus slowing down the whole aging process.
Precisely. It would help clarify what our interventions are really doing. Because ultimately, even though aging looks different on the surface across species, studying these fundamental mechanisms in flies can reveal core principles relevant to improving health span everywhere.
It's been incredibly insightful digging into how complex even a fly's death can be. It really underscores how much we can learn from these model organisms.
Agreed. It's a complex puzzle, but each piece we find in flies potentially helps us understand the bigger picture of aging.
As always, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you haven't joined us yet.
Please do.
And maybe think about this, how understanding the many ways a tiny fly's life can end might offer surprising clues about the aging process in all of us. If any part of this sparked your interest, you might want to track down the review or related papers for an even deeper dive.